So I'm not reading that out loud, Michelle. And you are. Okay. Sorry. All right. This is the professional part of the presentation. Hey, everybody. I'm Joe. This is Daniel and his wife, Shannon. And they are going to talk to us today about saleability and scalability. I'm thinking. Is that right?
Saleability and scalability. That's correct, Joe.
Teach us.
Well, I think if there's one thing to take away as a theme from today, I think if you're trying to get a strategic attention, I think you really want to focus on saleability and scalability. So I think what that really means as a concept is I think you want to focus on clinical use cases of your product, and you want to focus on where it is closest to what you're working on. So I think a lot of startups think about how they need to try to grow too quickly. They spread themselves too thin. And I think when you're trying to take your products and sell it nationally and you spread yourself too thin, it takes away the focus from being able to get repeat customers, repeat sales, and really get people that are going to be evangelists for your product. And so I think you want to, if you're in, let's say you're in New York and you have a new laparoscopic tool that you've created that is just awesome. It helps laparoscopic surgeons to do their job a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently. Well, I think you want to focus first in the New York area and in your region. You want to focus on the KOLs that are closest to you, and you want to focus on how can you make them repeat customers that are going to be there and keep on not only buying your product, but also talking about your products. And focusing on that rather than trying to worry about spread yourself to different markets or areas where you might not have the bandwidth to cover. That's going to go a lot farther for a strategic. So, because what they want is they want something that they can take and they can scale. The strategics know channels, right? They know what they can put in their channels and they know that they can sell it and they want to know that they can win. So if you are able to have an impact in your market and with your select KOLs, your select hospitals, or whatever it is that search your product, that is going to be something that they see as an opportunity to scale into different channels and other geographies or areas that they are already present in.
So what I heard you say in terms of too thin, it seems as though you jump right into geography as the place where people attempt to spread themselves too thin. Is that the essence of your conversation? That's where you would start with someone who
Well,
like a startup.
so I think every company is going to be unique, and I think everybody's going to have a different value proposition, and they're going to have a different pathway to market. So geography isn't always going to be the only factor. Part of it depends on where you need to sell your product, right? So, but I think every company is unique in that they want to have a focused plan on how they make the most impact with a select number of hospitals or doctors or whatever it is at the market that you would be serving, and figure out on how to win in that select group. Whatever that may end up being. Oftentimes it is geography, but it can be other reasons. I mean, maybe there's a group of hospitals or a group that trying to get into that isn't in your state. So geography might not be the most important thing that would make the most impact for your product. So I think, geography tends to be the first part that people will focus on, but it can be other things. Every situation is unique, as you know, Joe, with medical devices, and I think everybody has their own value proposition and how they need to sell that product. But geography can be a factor.
I'm thinking if I were meeting the Sheppards for the first time and we started here, I might think, so why am I listening to him? Why is he the guest today? And I'm going to play to the fourth wall for a moment and say, hi, folks, it's Joe. And I first met Daniel through his dad. And his dad was one of the original advisory group members that I had in various iterations of me trying to bring the smartest people I knew to bear. And I originally thought of Dad as the distribution guy because he used to be with Medtronic when it became part of Medtronic. And Dad often was the Medtronic side of a big deal, and he would find smaller guys who would maybe want to get sold to Medtronic. And as I understand it, Dave's value proposition was, hey, I know what the big guys do. Let me take that and make it work for you small guys so that you can properly represent yourself and get the best value when you do speak to a big guy. So um, I believe your firm, you, Dan, and Flo, and I don't know if you've grown to other full timers, but I know you guys are the nexus of the group. Is that um, is that the main or exclusive value proposition that you guys have? That hey, we used to represent the Covidians and the Medtronics of the world. Now we're bringing that kind of attention and focus to the smaller guys who are looking to get bought out slash work with the strategic.
Yeah, that is one of our main value propositions. And I think, yeah, just kind of reiterating your point, Joe, I think, Dave and Flo and a lot of the people that are on the advisory group that we work with come from strategic backgrounds where they have been doing deals from the larger strategic side for decades. And I think they really saw that when you're going up and you're trying to acquire a smaller company, there's definitely an unbalance in kind of the amount of people or the size of the group that come to the negotiating table. Mm-hmm. And if you think about like how medical devices companies are started, they're generally started with people from academia, from product development backgrounds, from backgrounds that aren't focused on the business model first. I think when you think about starting up a medical device company, you're thinking about, how do I get this product to work? How do I get this product approved? You're thinking about the patient. You're thinking of, and then down the road comes reimbursement. The business model isn't the first thing you're generally thinking about when you're thinking about a medical device company. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes when you get to the table for those companies that are early stage, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of time thought about the business model or the value proposition or the saleability and the scalability and how to really pitch that to a strategic to have impact. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we really see our value proposition is, as we only work in healthcare. We come from medical backgrounds, and we do this day in and day out. We aren't going to go try to sell an energy company next week or something different. This is the industry we live, we breathe, that we are in all the time.
I was having a conversation with Soumya, fellow MDGers may recall. He presented maybe a few months back about a medical device software that helps you prepare submissions. And he said, and I'll confess I had been guilty of this, a lot of people think of regulatory as, we need to get this device cleared. Well, okay, now let's do something else. And he said, regulatory is everywhere and all the time, and every time anyone in any function does anything, they have to check with regulatory. I believe that the perception of someone like you and what you do is, can you help me get my company sold? Yes or no? And if you get it sold, yay, and thanks so much, and here's your check, and we're done. And as I have interacted with your family now for years, I think that's not the right way to look at it. That in fact, it's a journey about increasing the value of the enterprise throughout, so that when you do sell, you've done all of the work ahead of time. But what does that look like if I were to engage you as a consultant? I mean, am I ending up paying you on retainer? And like, I don't have X $1,000s a month for the guy who's going to eventually help me 6 years from now sell my company. Like, when would it be reasonable? I'd love to have you on my team from day one. Yeah, how am I doing? Am I setting things up for scalability and salability? But that's not practical. I can't have you hanging out with me for 7 years. You want to get paid eventually, and I don't do that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. I think we focus on two types of clients. There's two types of customers kind of in the medical device segment. And I think one is the mature company that has $10 million in sales, a certain amount of EBITDA. And that's kind of the original model you were thinking of, Joe. And that's we're just going to sell that company. But a lot of the companies that we work with fit a different model, especially in healthcare. And that's where they are more early stage, possibly pre-revenue, where they've developed a medical device and they're trying to think about, what's my value proposition and how do I get an attention of a strategic? So I think our lifespan for how we engage with clients of that type it does take a longer time to build up the momentum, to create that value proposition, and to work together to try to create the best opportunity to have a successful process. So I would think it's never too early to start having conversations with us, because this is the industry that we are in. We like to be involved. We like to have conversations. We like to share insights and just, I mean, have conversations as early as possible.
I
And
really
as
want to,
far,
I want to call you on that because I think every consultant on this call would say that to a prospect.
Yep.
I know I want to have the first conversation so that we make sure that we have a viable concept. And I know that Michelle wants to have the first conversation because if we're not getting this clear, then why don't we just stop right now? And if Joseph Anderson were here, he'd say, if this isn't a quality product, you're going to kill people, and that's bad. We all have a function that, like, of course, this is an important thing. So on a relative scale of, hey, I'm, a startup, and all of the people and things that rightly deserve my attention, surely you can wait, right? We don't need to bring you in, Danny. Not yet. And besides, how would we pay you? You're not going to just hang out with me for that long. When is it practical? I get it. Talk with you right away. Maybe have an initial consultation. Let's check in 6 months. I got it. But what's practical? When do I really want to engage you?
well, I think every situation is unique, and we have very creative models in how we work with companies, to where there's not always an upfront or a stiff retainer that we are trying to put into our contracts. We really are creative in how we work with early stage companies. Otherwise, we'd have a lot fewer early stage companies that we work with. So we understand the cash flow challenges that early stage companies have. So I would say, as you're starting to put in the pieces together of you've got your product close to you've got a proof of concept, you have something that you have IP behind, you're thinking about your regulatory submission, that's a good time to start thinking about how you would engage somebody who would help to represent you and trying to get the attention of a strategic buyer, because that's when you want to start thinking about creating that value proposition. You want to start in having initial conversations with strategics months before you're actually in the position to sell it, because you want to
I
start
invite anyone on the call who's been in this position and debated this to leave a chat note. I'd love to add you to the call. And Brent, if you're feeling generous and you have the time and interest in sharing, because Brent did sell a company to Medtronic in 2014. And
yeah, I remember speaking with Brent about that at the 10X in San Diego a few years ago. Yeah, it sounds like he had a winner.
he did. And this one is, I think, even bigger. I mean, just his concept is fantastic. And it just so happened that along the way, the once in a century pandemic rolled along, and his banker said, and not that he didn't see it himself, but this really is a telemedicine play. And all of a sudden, what was a pretty good concept became an oh my God concept. And if we package it as the telemedicine play, the multiple goes up.
Yeah.
So really interesting things that he's doing. And Brent, if you have insights that you're willing to share in the call, I'll bring you on. You can say yes or raise your hand, or
And kind of just going with that point, Joe. I mean, we have had clients before where we've had similar arrangements to where we've had an engagement and we decided it was going to be beneficial to be slower in the process so that we're able to build additional use cases that validate different business models and will increase the valuation in the end. So I would agree with that, and we've done that before, and it makes a lot of sense if it's right for the individual situation.
in the meanwhile, Anne, who's not yet an MDG Premium member, writes in, there are far too many companies, including those that are publicly traded. They focus on how many clinics they're in rather than pull through, which I think is very true. And she asks, have you used the opportunity to build the clinical case by comparing outcomes in your geography versus a matched geography? So I guess that's kind of like a control. How did that work and what was the outcome? So the question for you is, have you ever attempted to isolate a geography with and without your product? Well, that seems hard. I don't know how you would get all of that data.
I'm not sure if she's asking specifically for clinical cases or for this the business model and for selling it to those hospitals. And I'd say we focus less on the clinical. and we focus more on the sellable model and the business model, and that's something that is a little bit hard to compare how it gets sold if in one area versus the other if your product's not there. That is a little bit tougher to kind of distinguish.
Have you found yourself in a situation where, somebody had a business model and you say, you know what, no, this is really a razor and blade model, and you can have so much more revenue if you focus on the disposables and you focus on the service. Have you worked on that kind of thing? And do you find receptive clients to that kind of, no, you're thinking about your entire business strategy incorrectly? Or are they pretty much like, hey, I already know what I want, just can you go and execute it?
Yeah, well, we like to bring
Shannon, he's doing a pretty good job. Don't you think?
Yes.
I would be very proud of him right now if I were you.
Very much.
If at any point you're thinking, why am I sitting on camera this whole time and I just haven't, taken myself off, we could do that if you want. I'm glad you're
But
here.
either way, here for support.
We'll keep her on. You seem to be doing so well, and I don't want to change anything about this.
She's the best looking one on the panel. Why would you take her off?
Why do you say things like that to me? Please continue.
So I apologize, Joe. What was the last question?
The last thing was, who was better looking, me or your wife? Before that,
It's our anniversary. Choose wisely.
Easy answer. Easy.
Before that, I was asking whether you've ever basically said, I think you're looking at your business model wrong. Why don't we rejigger it pretty significantly? And look, this is what the value can be. Has that ever happened? Or is it pretty much, this is what I'm doing, help me sell what I'm doing?
Well, I think we like to bring our experience and insights and share those in every engagement that we get involved in. And so we will always try to bring that to the table. But we also want to be part of a team. We want to be part of a collective. And we also want to share and listen to what they've experienced and what they've developed. So it's less that we are going to try to say, this is how you should be doing it. You're doing it wrong, do it this way. And more that we want to collaborate on a conversation and try to share with them why it makes more sense to maybe focus on this clinical use case than another, or go down this pathway. Maybe it will get you to market quicker. Maybe it's a bigger market that will be more attractive to strategics. I mean, there's lots of different reasons you could think of as to why a pivot would make sense. But yes, we have been involved in trying to shift that business model as far as somebody that was already in a set pathway, and try to just help them to understand how a different clinical use case and pathway could be more beneficial to their product and their stakeholders.
Wait.
Yeah. So first of all, I think what you guys are doing is great. But my question that I asked Joe to ask you was, selling in a regional market is obviously important for strategic acquisition, but even if you're in like a VC fundraise, VCs, 10 years ago, you got regulatory approval and you got your next round of financing, whatever it was. But now it's like, great, you got regulatory approval, sell in a regional market. Let's see those numbers. We'll talk more about the next step, right? So do you support in that space as well?
No, we aren't involved in fundraising. Yeah, so we aren't your traditional investment bank into where we're going to go try to raise money for medical device companies. We stick more to the strategic alliances and exit planning.
Okay, all right. So saleability in terms of company, not actual product.
Well, as far as this is concerned, what I'm trying to say is that yes, for smaller companies that are looking to get the attention of a strategic, they should be focusing on saleability and scalability. Now, the scalability is where the strategic comes in. The smaller company isn't scaling the product, but they want to see that it's saleable in your regional market or wherever you've focused on, so that they can take that and they can scale that into their channels.
Yeah, it does. I think that I was making a point to Joe was asking when to engage you. And what my point was to get to the point of a strategic, you have to have investment dollars, and understanding how you're going to achieve a regional market share is going to get you those next round of financing from the VC rounds or from the angels to get to your level of exiting to a strategic. It was more or less like that should be part of your sales pitch of when to engage you.
Yeah, I think everybody is kind of looking to exit at a different time, and I think it really kind of depends on what everybody's what every company, individual company is looking to do as far as what their goals are and where they're looking to exit at. I think we've seen exits at all sorts of different stages of a company's life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dwayne. I had a very similar question. So it's not about helping the fundraise, but I think this might be what Dwayne was zeroing in on. Understanding what our future looks like, and being able to make the case to VCs who have seen this over and over again. So let me back up. I've got a very early stage pre-revenue medical device that I'm building, and when I talk to VCs, they don't always come out and say it, but they want to see that this, I'm going to assume your technology works. Let's assume you do the 5 things you're going to do. Then at that point, is this going to be saleable, and for what for? So I could see your advice being useful to somebody like me in terms of, that, not having the experience. Am I going to look naive to an investor going on, or will I look like I've had some experienced advice on how to shape this company so that they can get the return they're looking for?
So I think just what I'm receiving is that using this saleable model is that's how you are looking at this as far as pitching to VCs, and that you're using that and to try to make that a better value proposition for as you're fundraising. Maybe I'm just missing one link there.
All right, let me try. So I've got a pitch. It says I'm going to sell 1 million products and make $1 billion in 5 years, and then sell this company so that everybody can exit and get paid.
Yep.
I have a plan, but as an early, inexperienced CEO of a company, I have concerns that VCs may look at this and say, this guy's missing parts of the picture here, that I'm not confident he's considered addressing. So almost like, for example, like if I were going to talk to you, the feedback I'd be interested in is, all right, to build your company for the greatest value, you're missing X, Y, and Z, and let's talk about A and B, so that I then am more knowledgeable and headed in more obviously the right direction or directions going forward. Now, getting in touch with strategics adds value to my company. So there are things that can be done both to add value, even before I'm thinking about selling, even just to raise money.
I think I understand your point a little bit more now. Thanks for reiterating that. So it's validating your business case that you've had as an early stage entrepreneur, and kind of getting that confirmation that and maybe a little bit of just a little of extra insights on how you're pitching that and making sure that that's something that is going to be received well by VCs and investors.
Well stated, yes.
Yeah.
I brought the other 3 on not only because they were among the more handsome members of our audience, but because they too have nascent concepts that probably wouldn't mind having big buck friends express interest and buy out at some point. Would any of the 3 of you care to?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting listening to this, because we're, essentially our technology is a material, and we're actually a little bit paralyzed right now on figuring out the business model. And where the value is. Is it in the material itself, or is it in the end product? Because that will drastically change the direction we go in terms of fundraising and who's a potential fit for us as a strategic investor. On the material side, do we then go to somebody like a Dow or a Clarion as a strategic partner to push the material side of the platform? Or do we try to push the finished product, do a fundraise to either get into the market ourselves or partner with somebody, a Cardinal or a Medline on the finished product side? And we're really kind of stuck right now on figuring out what that path looks like and where the maximum value is.
So Daniel in particular, but everyone to a degree. Kevin's going to be our presenter in 3 weeks, and it's one of those like, hey everybody, this is what I'm doing. What do all of you brains with all of you different functions think about? And I think that'll be a really rich conversation. So give that some thought and put that on your calendar. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about where you are in your development and what conversations, if any, you're having with strategics at this point?
Yeah, sure. We're still pre-manufacturing. I mean, we're still in R&D stage, but we're about to launch manufacturing next month or so.
What do you make?
We're making a device for epidural procedure to make the epidural procedure safer. It stops the needle as it goes in, so it prevents duropuncture, which is an injury that can happen.
You probably identified a half dozen strategics that would make sense for you.
Yeah, there's a number of people who are very heavily involved in making epidural needles or epidural accessories, and we are reaching out to them already. To be honest, we're trying to get out in front of them, and we're trying to just make contacts at this point. But it is interesting to see their interest in our product. Is I think it's really important. We're not FDA approved. We're not on the market. But I think it's really important that we're getting out into the market sooner than later. I did another device earlier, and actually Dave Sheppard helped us sell that one, but it took us a year and a half from the start of when we tried to sell it to when we actually got a signed contract. It takes a long time. It takes a year and a half to do it. And I think that if you think you're going to go, we were super naive. We're like, oh, someone will buy this. And, we're a small company. It takes us 2 or 3 months to make a decision. It took 2 or 3 months. It took 3 or 4 months to go from term sheet to actual signed contract. So, the big companies move at a very different pace than a small
I
company.
tell you how amused I am. I forgot that I paired the two of you and that you ended up working together.
Yeah. We met Dave at your 10X conference a number of years ago, and ended up working with him, and went really well.
Yay, it's working. But let me, you said something that I thought was really interesting. I imagine that there are a lot of young entrepreneurs who don't know anyone like Daniel, and they have a thing and they think, oh, this would be a natural strategic. And if I could loosely borrow what you said, it's like, well, we're just kind of looking around, feeling things out, making calls, maybe talk with someone, gauge early interest, and it feels appropriate yet haphazard. Like, maybe they'll pick up, maybe they won't, maybe I'll get them, we'll talk, just kind of check in. Daniel, is there something a bit more structured that you think is there more like a formula? You're going to say no, it's different for every company, but is there something that's, in the Sheppard track, you don't just, randomly make a call here or there. This is the process that will get the most people and the most interest and the most collaboration. Is there a way to do it?
Well, I think it really depends on what your motivation is. I think
I want to sell this company at some point and get rich.
At some point, or you're on that quest as of when you start messaging the strategic. Are you beginning that process, or are you just trying to create awareness?
I'm going to assume that in addition to getting rich, I have an ulterior motive, which is actually helping people. And that I want this thing to work, and I want whatever funding and resources and intellect I can bring to bear to make this thing really work, be in distribution, and help people, and enrich me and my family and put Zachary through college. So is there a way to do it other than, I was looking on LinkedIn, I see this guy is in needles, I thought I'd just see if he'd take my call, which feels very random.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would think so. It really does depend on every situation, but I think if you're trying to just create awareness with the strategic, I think you really want to start with the business unit in which it is relative to your product. I think you want to try to understand, what's going on with that business unit, what their strategic priorities are, and you want at the business unit level for them to understand that your product is going to have an impact in that segment. I think I would focus more at the business unit level. What we focus on when we're really trying to begin a process and get momentum with the strategic towards trying to sell it, towards selling the company, is we go for the corporate development level. So we'll go for the C-suite. We'll talk to the people who are involved in the corporate strategy and involved in the M&A more day-to-day. Now, those two groups, in the end, have to both be on the same page for an acquisition for it to be successful. The corporate development group has to be willing to write the check, and the business unit group has to be willing to put their job on the line in a way to say that I'm going to be able to sell this product. I want this product in my portfolio. I know I can sell it. I know I can be successful. There has to be a marriage between the corporate development side and the business unit side in order for any strategic to acquire a company. Does that kind of make sense towards your question, Joe?
It does. Eddie, you guys are young in the process and you're still waiting to get a device that authorities would say can be sold.
So yeah, the stage that we're at, we've got the device in manufacture. We're going for CE mark in Q2 of this year here in Europe. I'm based in the UK. The device is a catheter for male chronic retention, and it's the first of several that we're going to be developing. So the stage that we're at is we're looking to raise capital now to commercialize that and build the next. But to the points that have been made, we understand that it's a long path to get people familiar with things. And because I'm married to an English woman, I have great specific understanding and sensitivity that the words that I use, it's the difference between like small companies talking to big companies is me talking to my wife. We use the same words, but they mean very different things in our what we think is the same language. And that's just male and female. And when you add English American, it compounds it immensely. But when small companies, yeah, when we say, oh yeah, we want to do something quickly, and the big companies say we want to do something quickly, that's a two different timescales completely. So part of our objective right now is just getting on the map. And one of the other things I think is it's important to try to find several people to be on the map with within each of those companies, because
Absolutely.
People move, they get moved from a functional area to another functional area, or they just move from one company to a competitor. And so you can never be sure what's going to be happening in their lives. So if you only have one point of contact, that's risky. But the other thing is, again, having everybody think it's a good idea. To your point, Daniel, making sure that both the folks who think about the deal and doing the deal, but all the people who are actually going to have to use the product, everybody's got to be on side. So if you've got people who are all saying, oh, have you heard of this nifty little company? You start building consensus internally, and that hopefully gets to be a little bit quicker of the process. But it's it in itself is pretty much a full-time job.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and that marriage is as you're saying is why it can take such a long time. It's creating the awareness at the business unit level, creating the momentum at the corporate development level, and then within that, there's additional layers of having legal, regulatory department, IP, intellectual property. I mean, there's other components that have to be involved aside from the corporate development and the business unit level. Once you kind of get into the thick of the conversation about trying to be acquired too. So it's always takes longer than startups expect.
So yeah, like I say, the stage that, but the other frustration I know we're going to be running into is that the large companies in our, particularly the large companies in our space are massive, and whether they pay 100 million now or 500 million 2 years from now, they don't care. They're not going to be penalized for doing, paying a lot more later, because nobody ever knows that they could have done that other deal sooner. Yeah. And the longer they wait, the more risk comes out of the equation for them. And if they're as big as all that. So there's also an issue of sort of the continuum of, well, who are we most valuable to at what stage? And that does change over time.
Yeah, bringing up risk is a great point, because I think that is another thing to think about when you're thinking about how does the strategic think. And they're constantly thinking about how to de-risk an acquisition and what has that company done to de-risk it so that when I bring it in, I am confident that I'm going to be able to win in selling this product. And I think that's another good way to kind of think about how a strategic thinks.
Mm-hmm.
A point was brought up and that's why I brought Brent on. So Brent was kind enough to engage me on his project and ask me to help him get in front of strategics. Now, he has a fantastic network. He has investment bankers. They have lots of connections. And he charged me with, Joe, can we, get the market excited and, maybe publish a press release or blog post, use some social media, something so that a decision maker at a strategic would get an extra, like, oh, I've heard of that company, or just kind of make them more aware or make them curious and the like. And I found that to be a terrific challenge despite that kind of what I do for a living. Because to me, the days of I put out a press release and people read it, people of influence, people who could actually, have something to do with the decision, there are very few or no real outlets for it anymore. Journalism, a revered yet dying art, as news departments keep pairing editors and journalists because every bit of news is available with anyone with a phone, to get them to focus. And so one of the things we did was I looked at where are the most likely venues that his preferred eyeballs would be reading. And they were the huge names like, sure, let me get you on MSNBC, or, like how, I'm reasonably good at what I do, but you can't buy that kind of exposure. And it's, a real slog. So my question at the end of that big setup, Daniel, was, as you say, you've got to get in front of the right strategics and start having those conversations. And we had Mike on a moment ago where he's making a random phone call here or there. Is there anything resembling a path or a structure or a best practice to doing this other than write stuff, publish it, hope it gets read, call editors? It's all very, I'll make these steps, I'll put in the time, we'll make a good effort, and anything resembling like, and I think it could yield results, because it felt very like, I'll do it, Brent, but I don't know if anyone's gonna. Do you have an idea in that kind of situation?
Yeah, well, I think, it's a great thing to think about is getting the strategic buyer's attention. It's always better when they hear about you before you tell them about yourself.
Exactly.
It can make an impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of another difficult, as you're saying, but surefire way to get their attention is to sell in their market and to start taking their customers. And I think if you're thinking about saleability and scalability, and you're in a market where they're at, and their salespeople are trying to sell their product at a place you're selling your product, and that clinician chooses your product over their product, or that clinician is raving about this new product I just saw, that can also have a huge impact, because that goes up the channels. And at strategics, the groups that are selling and on the front lines are also responsible for staying on top of the landscape, kind of keeping abreast of what are the new products that are coming out, who are competitors, and they help to provide feedback up the channels to different management and all the way to the business unit level. So that is another way to really get their attention. Another kind of easier one that we focus on a lot is trade shows, because you're always going to have industry professionals at trade shows. Yeah. So last year was a tough year for trade shows. There still are other avenues to try to get that attention that way. But you're always going to have different industry professionals that are going to be involved in different trade shows or different events. And so trying to get yourself noticed, whether it's having some sort of case study you're presenting, or a white paper, or being an exhibitor. And then I also think doing marketing around those events. So, if you've already been talking to strategics, in Mike's case, and you're going to be at a trade show and you're going to be offering something, content wise, why not let them know about that?
No, I'm going to guide you away from more trade show talk, because God knows when the next time we're going to a trade show is. So do you have a virtual equivalent of that to suggest?
Well, you can set up your own virtual events, but I understand trade shows aren't happening as much, but we do have clients we're working with right now where there are virtual events that we are using as a marketing event to try to create awareness with strategics. So I think there are still those avenues, even in a virtual world. You do have to be a little bit more creative, but there still are those that exist.
Brent, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points, and they've been covered, so I won't dwell on them. I think Daniel's point about having your business model clear in your head should start when you're thinking about the concept, the product, the market need. I wouldn't wait until you're well into R&D processes to figure out that you create a product that either nobody wants or is addressing a market that's so small it bears no interest to anybody. I mean, we're currently with a product that we brought to a big pharma player, and their one complaint was we didn't have enough numbers in our projection. They wanted us to get up to $500 million a year in revenue in our projections. Fortunately, they're working with us and they're bumping the numbers up. They also said we don't even look at companies that are projecting $10 million in revenue 3 to 5 years out. So you have to really know what their interest in terms of size, but you want that business model, and you want to at least have an eye on your liquidity event at the end of it all. It's fine to get into these things. They always last 3 times as long and cost 3 times as much. But how are you getting out of it? I think is a question I see not given enough time to consideration of.
Yeah,
And
that's
please go ahead.
I was like, and that's somebody that's speaking from experience. I absolutely agree with you, Brent. If you can, and you can start thinking about that business model earlier in the conceptual phase of development, it'll pay off at the end.
Yeah. I think the follow-up to that is, people are talking about reaching out to strategics early in the process before you've totally finalized your business model or understand your value proposition. The only problem with that is you're coming at them with a very vague sort of value proposition before you define it. So you're really sort of throwing it on their desk and saying, why don't you define the value proposition for me? And the problem with that is if it's not focused enough, it doesn't get much attention on the other side of it. And when you come back at least a year later or 2 years later, it's always going to be 2 or 3 years longer than you thought it was. Transfer to manufacturing might take you a year or more. There might be some regulatory holdup. Then you're kind of now a cold topic sometimes. So I think I wouldn't go to a strategic until I have a pretty clearly defined value proposition and a reasonably defined path to market and a clear idea on regulatory issues before I would go to a strategic and begin having conversations. I think too early doesn't necessarily help you.
I think you had a point you wanted to make.
Sorry, Joe, you're talking to me?
That, Kevin, yes. You wrote into the point.
Yeah, I just made a comment that, going to Daniel's earlier point, looking at the operating units versus corporate, I've had projects blow up that were trying to be pushed down from above on the business units that just completely exploded because they didn't have buy-in at the business unit level. And I had a really good project that, turned into an hour-long conference call fight between 3 divisional presidents fighting over whose budget would pay for the regulatory work, and in the end, nobody's did.
Yeah. I think part of the mistake is, and maybe Daniel can provide more detail, was I think the common misconception BD teams make deals, and they sort of work it. They sort of flesh it out, but it's the general managers of that business unit in a large corporation that make the decision. And so it's the BD's job to sort of de-risk it. They're all very conservative. They don't want their name on a deal that goes badly. The valuation of numbers is somewhat of a very esoterical, vague concept. They'll pay what they think it's worth depending on their own strategic imperative. We're selling an RPM technology, so we're worth 3 times as much as we were last year. It's the same product. So it all depends on your own strategic imperative inside that corporation. But the BD people are really there to get the detail and then pass it off to the people who actually make the decisions, the general managers. So you spend a lot of time talking to BD people and go nowhere.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, Brent. I think the people that drive M&A they're there to manage the process, create the valuation case, put together the numbers, but it really is the president or whoever's running the business unit level that's going to be responsible for selling it. It's going to be responsible for if it doesn't work out, why not? And in the end, they're going to have a lot of impact on whether that gets acquired or not.
Okay.
Thank you, Brent.
I got to break off for another Zoom, so.
Okay.
Everybody.
I appreciate you zooming in.
Okay.
In the meanwhile, I had a question from a member who said, what is Shannon's role? And they felt that I was not giving you enough attention. So I'm just taking this moment to give you my full attention.
Thank you.
I explained in my offline answer that we're a family here and it's your first anniversary, and we invited Shannon, an interior designer, to make sure her husband stayed on the straight and narrow for this presentation. And I, for one, think he did a fantastic job.
Agreed.
I agree. Yeah, you did very well, Daniel. Bring us home. What should we, if you've heard nothing else today, remember this, folks, says Daniel.
I'll go with what's over my shoulder. I think it's focusing on salability and scalability, and I think it's focusing. It's not spreading yourself too thin. Focus on what your main value proposition is. Focus on one application at a time, and really win at what you're trying to do. Don't worry about the 10 different applications that could be possible for your device. Focus on the one that makes the most sense and be really good at that.
Tell us about what you're doing in the following week. Namely, take us through a little bit of what comes your way and how, you know, the kinds of issues that you're wading through right now. And I think that'll be as good a way as any for folks who may watch this in the future to put themselves in those shoes and say, yeah, that's the kind of thing I need. I should probably call that guy.
Well, right now is a really exciting time for us because we're launching a couple of different projects. So we've been working for the last couple of months trying to set up our clients with the value proposition that we all agree is going to be the best fit for the strategics that we're going to be talking to. And so now we're sending out the messaging, and we're beginning that process of engaging with strategics and having those conversations. So it's actually an exciting time as we're launching a few of those.
What verticals are you best connected in? I'm sure your network and the strength and breadth of it has a lot to do with your value to your clients. Are you especially deep in, say, cardiac, less so in pulmonary, more so in ortho, less so in dental?
Think about the group of people that we've brought on. I think we have expertise in most of all of these segments. I think it'd be tough to pick out a weakness for us. I think, you know, whether it's laparoscopic or cardio, orthopedic, you know, we have expertise on our advisory group to help out with whatever your needs are.
I was going to call up there, but Jim asked, and I'm bringing him on. He said, but be specific. What do you mean when you say you're engaging with strategics? What does that mean?
Well, that means that we are at the corporate development level. We are sending out what we put together is a teaser. It's a 2-page document that really sells the value proposition of the company and gives an overview of the product and the management in 2 pages. And then we set that up to send out an email to all of our contacts at the strategics that we're involved with. And then that begins the conversation to where we start to feed them more information about the opportunity, and we try to fit that into how that would work at the strategic. So I think to Brent's point is, you know, Brent made a good point about how you want to be focused in your value proposition when you're talking to strategics. I think there's a second layer to that when you're talking to strategics, is that you want to help to tell them how it's going to work for them, because strategics see thousands of opportunities a year. They are getting overwhelmed with different types of companies or opportunities that they could acquire. And I think that's why when you're able to formulate a value proposition that works and then help to tell them how it's going to fit in their channels and maybe the revenue streams it's going to be able to add to their bottom line, that is where you start to make a little bit more momentum.
Jim, I don't know your cooling system or company well enough. Are you small and looking to get bought out? Are you part of a major company?
We're a small company. There's about 25 to 30 of us, including production. And we basically invented this small compressor, and we address needs we enabled the miniaturization of refrigeration. And we serve 6 or 7 different markets now. And this med tech is a major area of growth for us. Not looking to be sold at this point.
Owner, the founder? What's your role there?
Excuse me?
What is your role with the company?
I'm the director of business development. They brought me in 07, right when the compressor company had been spun out from the parent. And my role has been to develop markets.
Was the parent a publicly traded company?
No, it's privately held since '84. Spin out kind of from MIT, you know, second generation from Foster Miller, a couple other places.
And you mentioned we're not looking to get sold. Are you actively looking to, we're not selling?
We're really looking to expand our markets.
And you have, like, we're going to do this in depth in what did I say, 3 or 4 weeks when it's your turn. But are you are you in the stealing share business?
What if we're stealing from anyone, it's the thermoelectrics that draw 5 times the power, dump heat into the small rooms that the doctors are in, in mobile applications where the batteries just can't keep up with the power draw. Because we're small, now we can compete at the 100-watt size level where thermoelectrics owned that previous. So we're working on awareness across the board in all our markets that can use the small size.
That'll be a fun week for us. So Daniel, I hope you can make it, and Shannon, I'll understand if this is your cameo.
I'll be there.
To the group, and why don't we call it there with a happy anniversary? Is it today? Today is the anniversary.
Super Bowl Sunday is our anniversary.
Are you guys football enthusiasts?
She's not. We have no intention of watching the Super Bowl on Sunday this year. It benefits that there's no team I care about. I mean, I could care less whether Tom Brady wins another one, and I'm a Raiders fan, so the Chiefs.
So let me just hypothetically, if the Raiders were in the Super Bowl, but it was your first anniversary, what?
Be watching.
She's a good wife.
As long as there's good food, I'm there.
Fair enough. Let's see. Next week we're talking with Craig next week. So tune in for that, and thank you, and have a good weekend. Thanks everybody. Danny, you did great.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Dad would be proud. Dad will be proud when he watches it later. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.
Have a good week.
Bye for now.
Bye.